Ritter Press, but do you know any easy way to gain weight? It's a good question. Um, I'll have to ask Jed Rogers, the guy that runs my CrossFit gym. He's like really big on nutrition and understands all that. So I will get you his phone number, Kaylee. All right. So good evening, late night, Friday night theology session. And so it's a Body of Divinity. Body of Divinity by Thomas Watson. There we go. Having a hard time with my my stands here. All right, so let me get the church page going. FBC Roseland Facebook page as well. There we go. And we're live. All right. Hopefully that'll work. Hopefully that'll stand up somewhere. I don't think it will. Oh, man. None of my stands are working. Having all kind of mechanical failures here. Shoot. All right. Let's see. I'm going to stand this one up here. There we go. All right. So it's a Body of Divinity by Thomas Watson. All right. And that is not working at all. Sorry about that. The Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. 1 Samuel 2:3. Glorious things are spoken of God. He transcends our thoughts and the praises of angels. God's glory lies chiefly in his attributes, which are the several beams by which the divine nature shines forth. Among others of his orient excellencies, this is not the least. The Lord is a God of knowledge, or as the Hebrew word is, a God of knowledges. Through the bright mirror of his own essence, he has a full idea and cognizance of all things. The world is to him a transparent body. He makes a heart anatomy. Revelation 2:23. Quote, I am he which searcheth the reins and the heart. The clouds are no canopy. The night is no curtain to draw between us and his sight. Quote, the darkness hideth not from thee. End quote. There is not a word we whisper, but God hears it. Quote, there is not a word in my tongue, but lo, our Lord, thou knowest it altogether. There is not the most subtle thought that comes into our mind, but God perceives it. In Isaiah, it says, I know their thoughts, end quote. Thoughts speak as loud in God's ears as words do in ours. All our actions, though never so subtly contrived and secretly conveyed, are visible to the eye of omniscience. In Isaiah, it says, I know their works. Achan hid the Babylonish garment in the earth, but God brought it to light. And Joshua, Minerva was drawn in such curious colors and so lively penciled, that which way soever one turned. There you go, Mazdak. What's up, bro? Catherine Harvey, what's up? Eunice, Judy Brown, good morning. Good morning. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good to have everyone on. It says, I know their works. Achan hid the Babylonish garment in the earth, but God brought it to light. And Joshua, Minerva was drawn in such curious colors and so lively penciled, that which way soever one turned. Minerva's eyes were upon him. So which way soever we turn ourselves, God's eye is upon us. In Job, it says, dost thou know the balancing of the clouds, the wondrous works of him that is perfect in knowledge? God knows whatever is knowable. He knows future contingencies. He foretold Israel's coming out of Babylon and the virgin's conceiving. By this, the Lord proves the truth of his Godhead against idol gods. In Isaiah, quote, shew the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know ye are gods, end quote. The perfection of God's knowledge is primary. He is the original, the pattern, and prototype of all knowledge. Others borrow their knowledge of him. The angels light their lamps at this glorious sun. God's knowledge is pure. It is not contaminated with the object. Though God knows sin. All right. Good to see that, Mazdak. All right, cool. My buddy Mazdak just made it to my mom's house in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So that's great. Mazdak and his family. So that's good. That's good. I wish I could have been there, but had a closing was supposed to happen today. Hopefully it'll happen next week. Gotta get this closing done. Hopefully get it done before Christmas. So hope you have a great time, brother Mazdak, and your family, and with my mom there in Myrtle Beach. It says, it is not contaminated with the object. Though God knows sin, yet it is to hate and punish it. No evil can mix or incorporate with his knowledge, any more than the sun can be defiled with the vapors which arise from the earth. Hey, Chris Bell from Ashley and I. Cool. Hey, good evening to you. Good evening. Friday night theology session. There we go. Body of Divinity by Thomas Watson. The vapors which arise from the earth, quote, God's knowledge is facile. It is without any difficulty. We study and search for knowledge. Proverbs 2, verse 4, if thou seekest for her as for silver. The lamp of God's knowledge is so infinitely bright that all things are intelligible to him. I get a sip of my drink. Some water this evening. Good evening, everybody. Just doing a little reading on a Friday night. Got to keep hydrated. All right. It says, God's knowledge is infallible. There is no mistake in his knowledge. Human knowledge is subject to error. A physician may mistake the cause of a disease, but God's knowledge is unerring. He can neither deceive nor be deceived. He cannot deceive because he is truth, nor be deceived because he is wisdom. God's knowledge is instantaneous. Our knowledge is successive. One thing after another. We argue from the effect to the cause. Excuse me. We argue from the effect to the cause. God knows things past, present, and to come. Uno inuito, some Latin there. At once, they are all before him in one entire prospect. There you go. There we go. God's knowledge is retentive. He never loses any of his knowledge. He has, another Latin word, as well as another Latin word. He remembers all as well as understands. Many things elapse out of our minds, but God's knowledge is eternized. Things transacted 1,000 years ago are as fresh to him as if they were done but the last minute. Thus, he is perfect in knowledge. But is it not said in Genesis, I will go down and see whether they have done according to the cry which has come upon me, and I will know? It could not be that God was ignorant, because there is mention made of a cry. But the Lord speaks there after the manner of a judge who will first examine the cause before he passes the sentence. When he is upon a work of justice, he is not in a riot, as if he did not care where he hits, but he goes straight against offenders. Quote, he lays judgment to the line and righteousness to the plummet. in Isaiah. In Hosea, it says, the iniquity of Ephraim is bound up, his sin is hid. Not that his sin is hid from God, but his sin is hid. That is, it is recorded, it is laid up against a day of reckoning. That this is the meaning is clear by the foregoing words. His iniquity is bound up as the clerk of the assizes binds up the indictments of malefactors in a bundle, and that the assizes brings out the indictments and reads them in court. So God binds up men's sins in a bundle, and at the day of judgment, this bundle shall be opened, and all their sins brought to light before men and angels. God is infinite in knowledge. He cannot but be so. For he who gives being to things must needs have a clear inspection of them. In the Psalms, it says, he that planted the ear, shall he not hear? He that formed the eye, shall he not see? He who makes a watch or engine knows all the workmanship in it. God made the heart, knows all its movements. He is full of eyes, like Ezekiel's wheels, and as Austin says, all eye. It ought to be so, for he is to be judge of all the world. There are so many causes to be brought before him, and so many persons to be tried, that he must have a perfect knowledge, or he could not do justice. An ordinary judge cannot proceed without a jury. The jury must search the cause and give in the verdict. But God can judge without a jury. He knows all things in and of himself, and needs no witnesses to inform him. A judge judges only matters of fact, but God judges the heart. He not only judges wicked actions, but wicked designs. He sees the treason of the heart and punishes it. Good evening, good evening. Good evening, everybody. Reading a little bit of A Body of Divinity. A Body of Divinity by Thomas Watson. Let me get a little water here. All right. 1. Is God infinite in knowledge? Is he light? And in him is there no darkness? Then how unlike are they to God who are darkness, and in whom is no light, who are destitute of knowledge, such as the Indians who never heard of God? And are there not many among us who are no better than baptized heathens, who need to seek the first principles of the oracles of God? It is sad that after the sun, S-U-N, of the gospel has shined so long in our horizon, to this day the veil should be upon the heart. Such as are enveloped in ignorance cannot give God a reasonable service. Romans 7:1, ignorance is the nurse of impiety. The schoolmen say, every sin is founded upon ignorance. And Jeremiah 9:3, quote, they proceed from evil to evil, and know not me, saith the Lord, end quote. Where ignorance reigns in the understanding, lust rages in the affections. Proverbs 19:2, quote, that the mind be without knowledge, it is not good, end quote. Such have neither faith nor fear, no faith, for knowledge carries the torch before faith. Psalm 9, verse 10, quote, they that know thy name shall put their trust in thee, end quote. A man can no more believe without knowledge than the eye can see without light. He can have no fear of God, for how can they fear him whom they do not know? The covering of Haman's face was a sad presage of death. When people's minds are covered with ignorance, it is a covering of the face that is a fatal forerunner of destruction. There we go. Good evening, everybody. Good to have you on. Use number 2. If God be a God of knowledge, then see the folly of hypocrisy. Hypocrites do not A bunch of Latin. Virtutem facere, but fingere. Hypocrites do not actually do good. They merely make a show of it. They carry it, page 58, they carry it fair with men, but care not how bad their hearts are. They live in secret sin. Quote, they say, how doth God know? End quote. Quote, God hath forgotten, he hideth his face, he will never see it. End quote. Quote, his understanding is infinite. End quote. He has a window to look into men's breast. He has a key for the heart. He beholds all the sinful workings of men's spirits, as in a glass hive we can see the bees working in their combs. Matthew 6, verse 4, he sees in secret. As a merchant enters debts in his book, so God has his day book in which he enters every sin. Jeroboam's wife disguised herself that the prophet should not know her, but he discerned her. 1 Kings 14:6, quote, why feignest thou thyself to be another? End quote. The hypocrite thinks to prevaricate and juggle with God, but God will unmask him. Ecclesiastes 12:14. God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing. Jeremiah 29:23. They have committed villainy in Israel, even I know, and am a witness, saith the Lord. End quote. But the hypocrite hopes he shall color over his sin and make it look very spacious. Absalom masks over his treason with the pretense of a religious vow. Judas dissembles his envy at Christ and his covetousness with the pretense of, quote, charity to the poor, end quote. John 12:5. Jehu makes religion a stirrup to his ambitious design. 2 Kings 10:16. But God sees through these fig leaves. You may see a jade under his gilt trappings. Jeremiah 16:17, quote, their iniquities are not hid from mine eyes, end quote. He that hath an eye to see will find a hand to punish. Hello, Faye Carney. Good evening. Good evening. Good to have everybody on. Reading some Banner of Truth. Banner of Truth book by Thomas Watson called A Body of Divinity. Use number 3. Is God so infinite in knowledge? Then we should always feel as under his omniscient eye. Hence, we ought to live as if always in full view. Seneca. Let us set David's prospect before our eye. Psalm 16:8, quote, I have set the Lord always before me, end quote. Seneca counseled Lucius that whatever he was doing, he should imagine some of the Roman worthies stood before him, and then he would do nothing dishonorable. The consideration of God's omniscience would be preventative of much sin. The eye of man will restrain from sin, and will not God's eyes much more? Esther 7, verse 8, quote, then said the king, will he force the queen also before me? Will we sin when our judge looks on? Would men speak so vainly if they considered God overheard them? Latimer took heed to every word in his examination when he heard the pen go behind the hangings. So what care would persons have of their words if they remembered God heard, and the pen is going on in heaven? Would men go after strange flesh if they believed God was a spectator of their wickedness and would make them do penance in hell for it? Would they defraud in their dealings and use false weights if they thought God saw them, and for making their weights lighter would make their damnation heavier. Viewing ourselves as under the eye of God's omniscience would cause reverence in the worship of God. God sees the frame and carriage of our hearts when we come before him. How would this call in our straggling thoughts? How would it animate and spirit duty? It would make us put fire to the incense. Acts 26, verse 7, quote, the tribes instantly served God day and night with the utmost zeal and intenseness of spirit. To think God is in this place would add wings to prayer and oil to the flame of our devotion. Amen. Use 4. Is God's knowledge infinite? Study sincerity. Be what you've seen. 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, quote, the Lord looketh upon the heart, end quote. Men judge the heart by the actions. God judges the actions by the heart. If the heart be sincere, God will see the faith and bear with the failing. Asa had his blemishes, but his heart was right with God. 2 Chronicles 15:17, God saw his sincerity and his infirmity. Sincerity in a Christian is like chastity in a wife, which excuses many failings. Sincerity makes our duties acceptable, like musk among linen that perfumes it. As Jehu said to Jehonadab in 2 Kings 10:15, quote, is thy heart right with me? And he said, it is. If it be, said he, give me thy hand. And he took him up into the chariot, end quote. So if God sees our heart is right, that we love him and design his glory, now, says he, give me your prayers and tears. Now you shall come up with me into the chariot of glory. Sincerity makes our services to be golden, and God will not cast away the gold, though it may want some weight. Is God omniscient, and his eye chiefly upon the heart? Wear the girdle of truth about you, and never leave it off. Is God a God of infinite knowledge? Then there is comfort. Number 1, to the saints in particular, and 2, to the church in general. Number 1, to saints in particular, in case of private devotion, Christian, thou settest hours apart for God. Thy thoughts run upon him as thy treasure. God takes notice of every good thought. Malachi 3:16, quote, he had a book of remembrance written for them that thought upon his name, quote. Thou enterest into thy closet and prayest to thy Father in secret. He hears every sigh and groan. And Psalm 38:9, my groaning is not hid from thee. Quote. Thou waterest the seed of thy prayer with tears. God bottles every tear. Put thou my tears into thy bottle. When the secrets of all hearts shall be opened, God will make an honorable mention of the zeal and devotion of his people, and he himself will be the herald of their praises. 1 Corinthians 4:5. Then shall every man have praise of God. The infiniteness of God's knowledge is a comfort in case the saints have not a clear knowledge of themselves. They find so much corruption that they judge they have no grace. Genesis 25, verse 22, if it be so, why am I thus? If I have grace, why is my heart in so dead and earthly a frame? Oh, remember, God is of infinite knowledge. He can spy grace where thou canst not. He can see grace hid under corruption, as the stars may be hid under a cloud. God can see that holiness in thee, which thou canst not discern in thyself. He can spy the flower of grace in thee though overtopped with weeds. 1 Kings 14:13, because there is in him some good thing. God sees some good thing in his people when they can see no good in themselves, and though they judge themselves, he will give them an absolution. It is comfort in respect of personal injuries. It is the saints' lot to suffer. The head being crowned with thorns, the feet must not tread upon roses. If saints find a real purgatory, it is in this life, but this in their comfort that God sees what wrong is done to them. The apple of his eye is touched, and is he not sensible of it? Paul was scourged by cruel hands. 2 Corinthians 11:25, thrice was I beaten with rods, end quote, as if you should see a scullion whip the king's son. God beholds it. Exodus 3:7, I know their sorrows, end quote. The wicked make wounds in the backs of the saints and then pour in vinegar. But God writes down their cruelty. Believers are a part of Christ's mystical body, and for every drop of saints' blood spilt, God puts a drop of wrath in his vial. Number 2, comfort to the church of God in general. If God be a God of knowledge, he sees all the plots of the enemies against Zion and can make them prove abortive. The wicked are subtle. Having borrowed their skill from the old serpent, they dig deep, hide their counsels from God, but he sees them and can easily counterwork them. The dragon is described with 7 heads in Revelation 12:3 to show how he plots against the church. But God is described with 7 eyes in Zechariah 3:9 to show that he sees all the plots and stratagems of the enemies. And when they deal proudly, he can be above them. Come, says Pharaoh, quote, let us deal wisely, end quote. Exodus 1:10. But he never played the fool more than when he thought to deal wisely. Exodus 14:24, quote, in the morning watch the Lord looked to the hosts of the Egyptians by the pillar of fire and troubled the host. End quote. How may this, like sap in the vine, comfort the church of God in her militant state? Exclamation point. The Lord has an eye in all the counsels and combinations of the enemy. He sees them in their train and can blow them up in their own mind. Yes, he can. Number 3, the eternity of God. The next attribute is God is eternal. In the Psalms, it says, from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. The schoolmen distinguished between a Latin phrase to explain the notion of eternity. There is a threefold being. Such as has a beginning and shall have an end, as all sensitive creatures, the beast, fowls, fishes, which at death are destroyed and return to dust. Their being ends with their life. Number 2, such as had a beginning but shall have no end, as angels and the souls of men, which are eternal, they abide forever. Number 3, such as is without beginning and without ending, and that is proper only to God. He is semper existens, from everlasting to everlasting. This is God's title, a jewel of his crown. He is called, quote, the King Eternal. 1 Timothy 1:17. Jehovah is a word that properly sets forth God's eternity, a word so dreadful that the Jews trembled to name or read it, and use Adonai, Lord, in its place. Jehovah contains in it time past, present, and to come. Revelation 1:8, quote, which is, and which was, and which is to come, quote, interprets the word Jehovah, which is, he subsists of himself, having a pure and independent being, which was, God only was before time. There is no searching into the records of eternity which is to come. His kingdom has no end. His crown has no successors. Hebrews 1:8, quote, thy throne, O God, is forever and ever, end quote. The doubling of the word ratifies the certainty of it, as the doubling of Pharaoh's dreams. I shall prove that God only could be eternal without beginning. Angels could not. They are but creatures. Those spirits, they were made, and therefore their beginning may be known. Their antiquity may be searched into. If you ask, when were they created? Some think before the world was, but not so. For what was before time was eternal. The first origin of angels reaches no higher than the beginning of the world. It is thought by the learned that the angels were made on the day on which the heavens were made. In Job, it says, quote, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy, end quote. St. Jerome, Gregory, and Venerable Bede understand it, that when God laid the foundation stone of the world, the angels, being then created, sang anthems of joy and praise. It is proper to God only to be eternal without beginning. He is Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, Revelation 1:8. No creature can write itself Alpha. That is only a flower of the crown of heaven. Exodus 3:14 says, I am that I am. That is, he who exists from and to eternity. Use number 1. He is thunder and lightning to the wicked. God is eternal. Therefore, the torments of the wicked are eternal. God lives forever. And as long as God lives, he will be punishing the damned. This should be as the handwriting upon the wall. It should, quote, make their joints to be loosed, end quote. Daniel 5, verse 6. The sinner takes liberty to sin. He breaks God's laws like a wild beast that breaks over the hedge and leaps into forbidden pasture. He sins with greediness, as if he thought he could not sin fast enough. Ephesians 4:19. But remember, one of God's names is eternal. And as long as page 61 to 62. And as long as God is eternal, he has time enough to reckon with all his enemies, to make sinners tremble. Let them think of these 3 things. The torments of the damned are without intermission, without mixture, and eternal. Number 1, without intermission. Their pains shall be acute and sharp, and no relaxation. The fire shall not be slackened or abated. Revelation 14:2. Quote, they have no rest day or night. Maybe it's verse 11. They have no rest day nor night, end quote. Like one that has his joints stretched continually on the rack and has no ease. The wrath of God is compared to a stream of brimstone. Why to a stream? Because a stream runs without intermission. So God's wrath runs like a stream and pours out without intermission. In the pains of this life, there is some abatement and intermission. The fever abates after a fit of the stone. The patient has some ease, but the pains of hell are intense and violent. The damned soul never says, I am now more at ease. Number 2, without mixture. Hell is a place of pure justice. In this life, God in anger remembers mercy. He mixes compassion with suffering. And Deuteronomy says, Asher's shoe was of iron, but his foot was dipped in oil. Affliction is the iron shoe, but mercy is mixed with it. The foot is dipped in oil. But the torments of the damned have no mixture. They shall drink of the wrath. They shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture. No mixture of mercy. How is the cup of wrath said to be full of mixture? Quote, for in the hand of the Lord there is a cup, and the wine is red. It is full of mixture, and he poureth out of the same. But the dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth shall wring them out and drink them. Yet in the Revelation it is said to be without mixture. It is full of mixture. That is, it is full of all the ingredients that may make it better. The worm, the fire, the curse of God, all these are bitter ingredients. It is a cup mixed, yet it is without mixture. There shall be nothing to afford the least comfort, no mixture of mercy, and so without mixture. And the sacrifice of jealousy, no oil was put to it. So, in the torments of the damned, there is no oil of mercy to abate their sufferings. Pretty tough. Pretty tough. Number 3, without cessation, eternal, the pleasures of sin are but for a season, but the torments of the wicked are forever. Sinners have a short feast, but a long reckoning. Origen erroneously thought that after 1,000 years, the damned should be released out of their misery. But the worm, the fire, the prison are all eternal. In Revelation 15:11, quote, the smoke of their torment ascendeth forever and ever. The torments of hell keep on punishing, they never end. Prosper. Eternity is a sea without bottom and banks. After millions of years, there's not 1 minute in eternity wasted. And the damned must be ever burning, but never consuming, always dying, but never dead. Revelation 9:6, quote, they shall seek death, but shall not find it, end quote. The fire of hell is such as multitudes of tears will not quench it. Length of time will not finish it. The vial of God's wrath will be always dropping upon a sinner. As long as God is eternal, he lives to be avenged upon the wicked. Oh, eternity, eternity, who can fathom it? Mariners have their plummets to measure the depths of the sea. But what line or plummet shall we use to fathom the depth of eternity? The breath of the Lord kindles the infernal lake. Isaiah 30, verse 33, and where shall we have engines or buckets to quench that fire? O eternity, if all the body of the earth and sea were turned to sand, and all the air up to the starry heaven were nothing but sand, and a little bird should come every 1,000 years and fetch away in her bill but the 10th part of a grain of all that heap of sand, what numberless years would be spent before that vast heap of sand would be fetched away. Yet if at the end of all that time the sinner might come out of hell, there would be some hope, but that word ever breaks the heart. Quote, the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, end quote. What a terror is this to the wicked, enough to put them into a cold sweat, to think as long as God is eternal, he lives forever to be avenged upon them. All right, I'm going to fold the page right there. Let's see, we did, I'm trying to think how many minutes we did there. I don't know if I have it recorded, but I'm going to go ahead and pause right there. Say 12, 17, 21, 11 p.m. Finished. Cool. Put this little piece of paper there. All right, cool. Thanks for hopping on. Try to hop on again later. Y'all have a great night.